Big 12 Conference as we get you set for Syracuse Houston tonight out in Las Vegas. Chancellor, thanks so much for coming out. We appreciate the time. How you doing today?
I'm doing well. Excited for a great week of basketball. Obviously, the Players Era tournament, and starting off with Houston versus Syracuse, it should be a good one out there in Vegas.
All right, so let's jump in on this Houston team because they've obviously been very good here for the last several seasons. How does this year's team, and I know it's a smaller sample size that you have to work with right now, Chance, but how does this team compare with the previous handful of Houston Cougar squads?
Well, first things first, the thing that hasn't changed is the defense, right? They're still a defensive-minded team led by Kelvin Sampson, and that kind of goes back to their culture that they love to throw around. You can't talk about Houston basketball without talking about culture, and that's something that Kelvin Sampson has certainly built over the past few years, particularly a winning one. But the thing this year about Houston is they're led by their freshmen. Kingston Flemings, their point guard, he leads the team in points per game and assists per game. Their leading rebounder is Chris Senac Jr., and that's something that's pretty unique because if you know anything about Kelvin Sampson, it's usually an upperclassman-led team, but he brought in one of the top recruiting classes in the country last year. There's another player off the bench named Isaiah Harwell, another 5-star. So they had 3 5-star players this year, and immediately we've seen their impact. We're talking about 2 guys who could be lottery picks in Flemings and Chris Senac Jr., and they're also flanked by returners like Emmanuel Sharp, who a lot of people might remember him from how it ended in that Florida game, the national championship. And then Milos Uzan, another guy who's a Big 12 type of guy who's all Big 12 type of player. So a really well-balanced team, but this year those freshmen are certainly leading the charge.
5 straight seasons now that Houston has finished in the top 5 of KenPom. And, Kelvin Sampson said something interesting the other day. He talked about playing in the Players Era tournament or a tournament like this. And he said they have to do it at Houston because they have a smaller budget compared to some of the other top programs. Do you get the sense in hearing from Kelvin Sampson and following him the last several years that he is able to do more with less, so to speak?
I would say yes. However, the thing about Kelvin Sampson, too, is he'll tell you, hey, we don't go after every single top guy. We find guys who we feel like fit our system, right? And if you look back on some of their top players over the past few years, Jamal Shead was a 3-star guy. He ended up being the unanimous Big 12 Player of the Year and unanimous All-American just a couple of years ago. Another guy, Marcus Sasser, who plays for the Detroit Pistons now off the bench. He's another guy who was an All-American type guy. He was another guy who flew under the radar. And so they're happy with finding guys who aren't necessarily the sparkling diamonds, coming out of their high school class, but at the same time, if they want to go get players, they certainly can. And look, he kind of joked about it earlier about we have to play in tournaments like these, for the NIL budget, but they're well taken care of. U of H, they know that this is a premier program and they treat it as such. And so, as I mentioned, Kelvin Sampson, they go out and they get who they want. And this year, it just so happened to be 3 5-star guys.
Yeah, and you look at traditionally, you talked about the defense right off the bat, and you said the defense is still there. And I know you touched on this earlier in this interview, but I was watching them the other night, and against Ryder, they make 7 3-pointers in the first half. It seems like this team can score as well, and that's a lesser opponent, but it looks like they've got some more offensive firepower than maybe in recent years. Do you think that of all these teams Kelvin Sampson has had, do you think this one has the potential maybe to be the best of the bunch, given the fact they can score the basketball?
I certainly think so. And the reason being is not just because they can score the basketball, but also they just have the most upside because of these young players that they have on the team here. And in previous years, kind of what you see is what you get. But I think Kelvin Sampson is talking about it earlier about hey, we're not the same team. And of course, no team will be, but he really believes there is an unlimited ceiling because of some of these young players. And I think if you're a Syracuse fan, now's the time to get them right now. I believe they moved down to number 4 in the polling, at least on the coaches one. Last week they were number 2. And if I'm being candid, I don't necessarily believe that they're the number 2 best team in the country. And that's just because I think there are a few teams that might be better off to play them right now. Now, what will they look like come November when Kingston Flemings, as I mentioned, competition, who's averaging 17-5, continues to get better and goes through some more challenges like a Syracuse and like some of the other teams they'll play in the Players Era tournament. When they go through the Big 12 and have to play BYU, Arizona, Iowa State, some of these top teams in the country, what will they look like, towards the end of the season? This is going to be a very dangerous team. So yes, I do believe that, offensively and just their overall potential, they have certainly an opportunity to not only get back to another Final Four and another national championship, but this time finally get the thing that's been eluding Kelvin Sampson his entire career, and that's a national championship.
They did test themselves once already out of conference. That was the Auburn game, 73-72 winners. You mentioned Kingston Flemings and how talented he is, 22 points, 7 assists in that game. What stood out to you from that one big test that Houston passed a couple weeks ago?
Well, one, I just wanted to see how they would fare in that one, especially with this young group. And so, of course, when you take it on a team like Auburn, an SEC team, physical, more athletic than some of the, group of 5 teams that you might be, like some of the non-power conference teams that they've been playing, like a Ryder or some of the other teams early on. I thought Kingston Flemings and Chris Senac Jr., they responded really well. Chris Senac, he had, I believe, like 18 and 8 in that game, and so he was a monster on the boards. The thing is, he just couldn't stop himself from getting in foul trouble. And another guy who we haven't even talked about yet is JoJo Tugler, who I think could go on to be the National Defensive Player of the Year. He and Chris Senac Jr. make for one of the best front courts in the entire country. He's another guy who last year was on the all-defensive team nationally, and he started to open up his game as well offensively. They have him start shooting threes, which if you've been following the Houston Cougars, that's like, whoa, like since when has JoJo Tugler been able to do that? But I thought they responded well overall, and especially down the stretch. If you watch that game versus Auburn had opportunities to win that game late, but Houston did what they always do, and that's get stops late down the stretch. And so, it was a learning lesson for them, but it also helps that, at the end of the day, it went into the win column. I'm excited to see them, today against Syracuse, who, as another top defensive team. They're 1-2 as far as opponent points per game. So I imagine it'll be a low-scoring game, but it should be a fun one and a good test for the Houston Cougars.
Yeah, and along those lines, that's where I was going last year, Chancellor, was just what do you expect tonight? Just to give us a point of reference, Ken Pom has it as 76-65 Houston win. There's some rumors out there that Donnie Freeman might not be able to play tonight for Syracuse given an injury, which would obviously be a big loss for the Orange. But from a Houston perspective, I guess, how are you looking for this game to play itself out?
Yeah, for me, I want to see if Milos Uzan and Emmanuel Sharp can have another one of the better games, because so far this season, it has been a freshman movement. They've led the charge, and really it's been interesting that the seniors in Emmanuel Sharp and Uzan have taken a back seat. And so when you get into these, these tournaments, especially these early season ones, you're facing tougher competition. You're going to need some of your upperclassmen to step up, and especially when you talk about this Players Era tournament where you have potentially 3 games back to back to back. It's going to wear on your legs, and that's something they mentioned too of the challenge that it has on them physically to play 3 games in a row, especially when you think about how hard Houston plays. I mean, they dive at each and every single loose ball. They're super physical on box outs. And so I'm interested to see how the Syracuse front court responds as well too. Right. And for some teams, this is something that I've noticed as well. If you're not used to playing Houston, and you're right, if you're not used to playing them in the Big 12 or previously before that in the AAC, sometimes it can be like a shock for you, right? Like everybody knows when you play Houston, it's going to be a physical game. They're going to be aggressive defensively, but sometimes you can see it on film. It's different when you actually go up against it and play on it in person. So I'm interested to see how Syracuse fares on that, particularly that physicality early on, and that can help dictate the way this game goes on throughout this matchup.
It's the way they used to talk about Syracuse in the NCAA tournament with that 2-3 zone, that you can't replicate it in practice, that you got to see it up close and personal to really feel what it's all about. Chancellor, thanks so much for coming on. Really great insight. We appreciate the time. Enjoy the game tonight, and hopefully we can check in with you again down the road.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Chancellor Johnson covers the Houston Cougars for the Big 12 Conference, Paulie.
Not the good news you're looking for from John Rothstein, Steve, but Tyler Betsy is available tonight.
Yes, I saw that. Yes, I saw that while Fran Brown was talking. So that is a good thing.
Yes, so you've got at least 7.3 points per game coming back to you.
Well, he may see more minutes tonight.
Yeah, we'll find out.
Yeah. Okay, let's take a timeout. We're very much behind here. We'll try to get back on time. We are back after this.